Hey gang, this is Mr. Schmidt from Environmental Science Recap of October 19th. So glad to see everyone could find the Zoom link and follow through with that. It's going to make it a lot easier on me to set it up this way. So today we're talking about the nutrient cycle, specifically carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. There is an assignment about where carbon is going and carbon dioxide is going. But the big goal for today is to get our biomes review underway because later this week you're going to have a quiz on biomes. It'll be open note. Okay, so it's important that you write down as much as you can on paper to get that done. All right, so let's take a look here at the carbon cycle. So name as many carbon sources as you can. And during class, a lot of you did a great job talking about carbon sources. So we breathe out carbon dioxide. So humans and all mammals and all animals breathe out carbon dioxide. And then anything that burns releases carbon dioxide. So wood fires, coal, natural gas, all of those things give off carbon dioxide. Okay, so we can keep going through different variations of those examples, but those are definitely the biggest ones. We'll see those in the carbon cycle. Okay, so what we're trying to do is describe the carbon cycle and then look at similarities and differences with the nitrogen and phosphorus cycle. Okay, so the carbon cycle has some sources where CO2 is released into the atmosphere. Anything that's growing and breathing and burning. So breathing, we say respiration. Burning, we say combustion. Okay, any of those things are going to release carbon dioxide. There's even times when plants are growing that they have cellular respiration and they will also give off small amounts of carbon dioxide. But that brings us to our next part, places where carbon dioxide and carbon comes out of the atmosphere and gets held or is in a sink. Okay, those processes that absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, some of them are geological, like rocks and rock formation, and some of them are biological growth. There can be a little bit in animals, but there's a lot more stored in biological growth within plants. Okay. So when we look at cellular respiration by organisms, we're seeing that so the cells inside your body are taking in water and carbon dioxide. And more importantly, in animal or in plants, it's taking in a great deal of carbon dioxide, and you are giving off, and your cells are giving off carbon dioxide. Okay, so you as an animal produce water vapor and carbon dioxide. That's what comes out of your lungs and for the most part. Okay, plants take in that carbon dioxide and produce almost all of the oxygen in the atmosphere. If we go back billions of years, we can trace almost all of the oxygen in the atmosphere from carbon dioxide that the plants took in and then released as O2. Okay, carbon dioxide concentrations increase during the spring and summer, and in the fall and winter they decrease. So what we're going to see is a very small cycle of the seasons as CO2 changes. And then if you track thousands of years and the ice ages and so on, you see some more variation. The biggest concern is over the last 100 years, we've seen a great big increase of CO2 production into the atmosphere that far exceeds any of the ice ages that humanity has experienced. Okay, so if we're looking at life in the atmosphere, microorganisms in swamps, rice paddies, and soil production produce nitrogen and methane. Methane is another molecule that contains carbon and is in the air. Okay, and these microorganisms are in your digestive tracts. Okay, so you and I have some microorganisms inside our intestines and stomach, and they help us eat. Okay, um, but other animals have other microorganisms. So termites have little microorganisms, bacteria type things that help them break down wood. Cows and sheep have different microorganisms that help them break down grass. Those three, termites, cows, and sheep, happen to produce a lot of methane as well. Okay, so you and I do not produce as much methane. We do produce carbon dioxide. So when we look at human factors, not only are you and I breathing and producing carbon dioxide, but we look at energy consumption, deforestation, industrial and agricultural practices, and all those things have affected Earth's atmosphere. So the example I gave is this weekend, I got in the car. It's a gas-powered car. I drove it. Okay, I went to the store. I bought some beef. So that beef was all from cows, which means they're producing their own methane, and there's the entire production cycle to get it from a cow into that steak that I had in front of me. Okay, and then I came home and I turned on the grill and I lit the propane, and that also produces carbon dioxide, and the production cycle to get all the propane made also produces um, greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide, and is part of the carbon cycle. Okay, so if we look at all those things, and then where they grew the cows, the actual farms and ranches, they might have cut down trees to make room for the cows. Okay, most recently, Brazil has started to increase their farm capacity by cutting down part of the rainforest. Okay, this echoes what the United States did hundreds of years ago, as we also cut down many forests to produce our farmlands and ranches. Okay, and what Europeans and Asians did before that, when they cut down natural forests to produce more farmland. Okay, so there we have all these pockets where we've taken carbon and carbon sinks, and we've released it back into the atmosphere. Okay, so part of that carbon cycle is affected two ways. One, by deforestation and vegetation loss. Okay, so deforestation, so the forest is no longer there to take in carbon, and the vegetation is no longer holding that material. Okay, so when the plant dies, less carbon dioxide is absorbed from the atmosphere during photosynthesis, and the decaying and burning wood adds to carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So like when I go hiking, you see all those trees that have fallen over in the forest. As that fallen tree breaks down and decays, it is releasing the carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. So a healthy old growth forest is almost carbon neutral, as the live trees take in the carbon, the dead trees release the carbon, and you have this nice neutral, stable environment. Okay, so as we look from carbon to other minerals and other cycles, one thing we notice is that the industries and companies really drive this, especially farming. So if we look at fertilizer for agriculture, so the fertilizer that you put on the ground to help your plants grow, that has specific nutrients that your plants need, and that is a great indication of the cycle and of some of the things we're doing. So if you look at this is going back quite a few years. If you look at it from 1960 on, we've added more nitrogen to the soil and potash and phosphate. And the two I want to talk about right now are the nitrogen and phosphorus and the phosphate. Okay, so nitrogen is super common. It is the vast majority of the air in the atmosphere. So it's in the atmosphere, there's no color, there's no smell, it's just there. It goes into our lungs, it doesn't do anything. It comes back out of our lungs, it doesn't do anything. not a big deal. So plants and animals cannot use nitrogen gas, okay? But we still need nitrogen in some other format. So if we can't use it as a gas, as N2, we need to find it as either ammonia or nitrate, okay? So we're gonna need something other than plants or animals to move that along. All right, so I want to take a quick aside here. I'm just kind of on Wikipedia to show you a quick comment about what we're talking about. So if we take everything that's alive, what we see is we're talking about a lot of animals. You and I are animals. That's one part of all living things. Plants is another important part of all things that are alive. But that is just a fraction of the puzzle of all living things. And this is one model. There's other ways to break this down in biology. We'll go into a lot more detail. But the one I want to focus on here is fungus, which is things like mushrooms and mold and yeast. These are things that grow on dead things pretty much, okay? So that is what we're going to talk about next. Is there's plants and animals have limited abilities to do this. Like I said, fungus and bacteria have very different roles and very different abilities that we rely on to keep all this process going. Okay, so if we come back over here, we see that we have the different types of uses here, okay? And so like I said, plants and animals can't use nitrogen gas, but we have all those other different things that have different abilities in the ecosystem. Okay, so now once we look at this process, we see there's a whole lot of nitrogen gas in the air, okay? Factories can try to pull that in and process it, but what's much more common is that there's some bacteria, excuse me, or mold that'll pull in the nitrogen and turn it into ammonia. And then it'll go forward and turn it into nitrates, okay, NO2 and NO3. So these tiny little molds and bacteria in the soil will break stuff down. And when it breaks down the carbon, it's also pulling nitrogen out of the air and turning it into something super useful for the plants. Okay, so then those nitrates come up and enter into the plant's roots, or the fertilizer company digs it up and turns it into fertilizer. And then the plants can then use those ammonias and nitrates to grow and to make amino acids and all the things that we want when we eat plants, or cows want when cows eat plants. And then if the plant dies or the cow dies, some of that nitrogen can then go back into the soil as nitrates and ammonia, and more plants can grow. Okay, so sometimes we'll look at things like chicken poop, and we'll see that as a great source for fertilizer to help plants grow because it has a lot of these ingredients in it. Okay, so if no plants or animals use it, it can escape back into the atmosphere and break down and be released back as nitrogen gas. Okay, or it can go into the soil, and some of the plants and animals in the ocean or rivers can also use all this. Okay, so when we're looking at this, there's a conversion process that goes from nitrogen, N2, to ammonia, NH3, to nitrate, NO3. Okay, and this process is called nitrogen fixation. So that can happen in water and aquatic ecosystems with blue-green algae, which some of you are probably seeing here. This looks pretty green to me, so there might be some nitrogen fixation going on there. The lid's on my cap there, so it may not be able to get much nitrogen out of the atmosphere. Okay, then there's bacteria, and some bacteria is known to grow on your pea plants and your bean plants, which is why I suggested you plant them in your grasslands, is because once they start growing, certain bacteria starts growing, and then that nitrogen fixation happens. Okay, those are the big categories. You can also have lightning. When it streaks through the sky, it will tie together some of the nitrogen and turn it into nitrates as well. Okay, so the nitrogen returns to the soil by decomposing from once living things. Okay, so that's where we talk about bacteria and fungi. So if we're coming over here, again, our plants and animals are doing their things, but this whole group of bacteria, okay, stuff that normally we think of makes us sick, if it's in the soil, it's doing some great things for the soil and for the environment. Same thing with fungus. It might just be a mushroom or something, but it's still playing an important role in the atmosphere. Okay, so it's denitrifying or pulling nitrogen out of the atmosphere, or returns it to the atmosphere, depending on which direction we're going. Okay, so why is nitrogen so important to people? Well, our DNA and RNA and amino acids and proteins all have nitrogen in them. And so if we don't have nitrogen in our food sources, then we're not going to be able to grow and maintain healthy DNA and RNA and amino acids. So it's very important for our food sources there. Okay, and then the other cycle we wanted to look at was the phosphorus cycle. Okay, so remember we said the water cycle, most of that is in the ocean. Carbon cycle, most of that is in plants. Okay, the nitrogen cycle, most of that was in the air, and the phosphorus cycle, most of that is in rocks. Okay, so the phosphorus cycle starts off in rocks, and then it gets into water, and the water dissolves a little bit of that phosphates and carries it into the lakes and streams. Okay, so that's called leaching. And then once you have the dissolved phosphates, it is then used by plants. Again, the water comes into the roots, and as the water comes in, it brings all these nutrients with it, and we get the phosphates going into the plants. And then whatever eats the plant gets the carbon, gets the nitrogen, and gets the phosphorus. Okay? And then animals eat all the plants, they go to the bathroom, they eventually die. Anytime any of those things happen, some of the phosphorus is now going back into the environment or back into the soil. Okay, so now we see, like I said, it starts off, it can either be in a volcano or it can be in rocks. Okay, and it will then get pulled into the rock or out of the rock by dissolving it in water, and then it goes into our water cycle. Okay, or if it comes out as a volcano, it will get caught in the condensation of clouds, and again, it'll enter our water cycle. Okay, and then whatever plants are taking in the water are also taking in the phosphates. Okay, all right, so the phosphorus cycle in humans, so we can just wait for the plants to slowly take in the phosphorus and slowly grow, or we can dig up the phosphorus from specific sources, turn it into fertilizer, and spread it out in our garden and spread it out in our farms, and then the plants will grow faster. Okay. A problem with that is if we spread it out and we're not careful, next time it rains, the phosphorus in the soil and rocks will get washed away and go into our water system. All right, so one thing I want to do to emphasize this, so we talked about the farms put down phosphorus and nitrates to help the plants grow. Well, there's a lot of farms in the center of the United States here, and they're all putting down phosphorus and nitrogen, and every time it rains, they're going to lose some of that, and that's bad for their bottom line. They're losing something they just spent money on, and it's all flowing down through the Mississippi River into the Gulf of Mexico. If farmers in Oregon and Washington put down fertilizer, that is going to flow into the Pacific Ocean, which is a much larger body of water and a much smaller piece of farmland. So they have the same problem of loss of an investment, but there's not the same environmental problem. And what we see is if all of the phosphates and nitrates come flowing into the Gulf of Mexico, they get set up what's called a dead zone, where there's so much nutrients that plants cannot grow, often from a lack of oxygen. So what we see here is if we're looking at the nitrogen cycle, and specifically, we see that a lot of the nitrogen going into the Gulf of Mexico is from farm fertilizers, okay? And animal manure, okay? So there's all these other pieces that we've added to the Gulf of Mexico that weren't there originally, and that the original ecosystem was only designed to handle one part of this. And so it's really been struggling to keep a healthy living area in the center of the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, so next time we're going to talk about the quiz and we'll talk about these details, but this was just to set you up for the beginnings here so that you could also, where is it? There it is. So you can also answer this short assignment, okay? But my suggestion was to save this assignment because this is going to follow on this next quiz, but our current quiz is going to be on biomes. So I suggested you go back over the old labs and answer the biomes review, which for some reason is not loading. All right, for some reason that didn't load, but I'll let you go to this and pick it up. Hopefully it's loading for you. So that concludes our Monday review. I'll see you all Wednesday as we go through what we need to know for the quiz. Okay, and with that, have a good day.